Hello everybody, my name is Falkman and welcome to the ultimate Cyberpunk 2.0 Netrunner guide. My previous guide for the vanilla version of Cyberpunk has reached more than 500,000 views, so thank you guys so much for this, and it is time for round 2. Netrunning in 2.0 is a little bit more complicated than it is in the vanilla version, but after literal days of testing, I think I cracked the code. And let me tell you, this build is extremely powerful. It offers very different ways of play, so you can basically tailor it up to your playstyle. It works well both in combat and in stealth, and it is totally up to you if you want to combo this with certain weapons. And by the way, this build combos really well with certain weapons, which I'll explain later. But if you want, you can play as a pure Netrunner, which is also a very strong option with this build. All the testing was done on very hard, and this build allows you just to breeze through this difficulty. And this video is designed for both new and advanced players, meaning that I will be explaining certain things that changed in 2.0 and Phantom Liberty that you might not be familiar about, aside from explaining the build, of course. But without further ado, let me just explain to you what can you expect from this video, and let's jump into it. So I'll start off with talking about perks and attributes. So here I'll mention the abilities that you want and what they do and why you want them. Then I'll talk about cyberware and explain in short how it works for those of you who are new to the game or aren't familiar with how it works in 2.0. And after this, I'll of course mention the game plan. So I'll be talking about the ability rotation, what quick hacks to use, and what weapons combo the best with this build. And of course, lastly, I will mention about how I personally would approach the leveling process for this build, and will give you some tips and tricks on that, and some general tips and tricks too. And that is it. So if you want to get your net running game on another level, then just sit back, relax, and let's get this poppin', baby. So generally, this is the attribute spread that you want in level 60. But the main perk trees that you want to focus on are, of course, intelligence, body, and technical ability. Reflex is my personal choice. You can also just max out cool if you feel like it, but I will go more into detail with this once I'll start talking about the more hybrid kind of build. But for now, let me tell you which perks you need just for net running. So naturally, let's start with intelligence. This is generally what you need just for quick hacking. Now, most of the perks in this general area basically just increase your damage, which is pretty good. And as you probably noticed, I haven't picked certain perks because they don't really benefit that playstyle that much. For example, proximate propagation, because you're not going to be doing close range quick hacking that much. Also subordination, because at least in the later game, control quick hacks aren't really that important for this build, and that means that ice pick is also not gonna be that great. But I'm talking late game here, so like level 30 or 40. Before that, you're highly dependent on cover and control quick hacks, so I would actually recommend getting those two perks for the leveling process. Because for example, embedded exploit allows you to deal plus 60% quick hack damage against enemies who are affected by, for example, control quick hacks. But honestly, the most important parts of this tree is the overclock and spillover. Now, overclock is your main cooldown with this build. This is something like a trinket in World of Warcraft that you pop when a big fight comes up. And basically what it does, it allows you to use your HP as RAM when you run out of RAM. And I know that at first it may not sound like much, but this is the core ability of this build. Mostly because RAM is very scarce in Cyberpunk 2.0, but if you have enough survivability, you can basically spam quick hacks all the time until the cooldown of overclock ends. And even though overclock's duration is just 14 seconds, there are certain quick hacks that basically refresh its duration, which is awesome, and I will talk about that in detail once I'll start talking about the game plan. But if it comes to the small perks around overclock, they are basically to boost your survivability while using the ability. So these are quite important. And as for the last perk in this tree, which is the spillover, it gives quick hacks plus 50% chance to spread to another target while you're in overclock mode, which is massive. So if it procs with a quick hacks like system collapse, which is basically system reset from the previous version of the game, you basically get 2 eliminations from casting 1 quick hack, which is pretty good. Now, as for the tree on the left side, this is basically the setup that you want to get. It's basically about queuing up the quick hacks, and it allows you to extend that queue up to 4 quick hacks on a single enemy. And even though for the regular fights it might not seem that important, it really does help out on boss fights or even on certain elite enemies. And there are 3 smaller perks that help you out in general by a lot, and that is warning explosion hazard, which basically increases the device explosion damage on enemies, but also counter a hack and copy paste, because this basically allows you to quick hack netrunners that are trying to hack you, and hacking them won't just stop them from hacking you, but the hack that you use on a netrunner will basically just spread to their allies, which is very strong. And that is basically it if it comes to this tree. Now I'll come back to it once I'll start talking about the hybrid netrunner build, but for pure net running, that's basically all that is required. So let's jump into another essential attribute tree, which is the body, surprisingly. For pure net running, you basically need just a few skills here, but they do help out greatly with this build. Perks like Painkiller, Combat Kit, and Dwarf Head help you out a lot with survivability, not just in overclock, but in combat in general, which may come in handy. But the most important perk from this one is the Adrenaline Rush. Now what this does is basically after consuming a health item such as Max Doc or a Blood Pump, it basically adds some extra HP as a shield. And while you have it active thanks to Juggernaut perk, you also move 20% faster and deal 10% more damage, which is useful. And as for the core skill on the top of this tree, it basically boosts your health item refresh speed by a lot, because it's plus 20% health item recharge per an enemy neutralized. And this will greatly help you to keep your HP up while using it to both survive and cast quick hacks in the same time, while overclock is active, of course. But that's it for the body. Let's go into the last essential tree, which is the tech. Thankfully, tech doesn't feature crafting anymore. It's a system that has been completely taken out from the attributes, which is fantastic. But instead, tech now focuses on increasing your cyberware capabilities and basically allows you to slot more cyberware into V. But besides that, it also affects health item recharge and grenade item recharge, and also it affects tech weapons. And what I recommend using here is also not a lot, just like in the body tree, but it does help out a lot with this build. So starting from the middle tree, these are basically the perks that increase your cyberware capacity, basically allowing you to slot more cyberware into V. Although perks like extended warranty and driver update just basically make your cyberware stronger in general. And as for the last perk in this tree, it is actually very powerful because it adds 2 things. First of all, it extends your cyberware capacity by a certain amount of points, and if you use this extra capacity to slot more cyberware into the system, there's a chance that you get into a fury state while in combat. And fury state, just like the description says, basically gives you 10% more damage, 30% critical chance, and 50% more critical damage. And it lasts for 12 seconds. Now, many people say this debuff is super strong, it is extremely powerful, but in my opinion, what really is incredible for this perk is the extended capacity. But the debuff is a pretty nice addition to it, although it has only 5% of proc-in if you use all the extra capacity. And as for the last few perks of this tree and build in general, I highly recommend spending a few points on those perks in the left tree, because they basically just increase your health item regeneration, which, as I've said before, is very important with this build. Oh wait, but I forgot about cool. If it comes to pure net running, I'd just give 1 extra point to cool, leaving it at 4, just to get the access to the first layer of perks, and these are the perks I would personally get to boost the stealth experience. And honestly, that is it for the skills required just for net running. So now let's talk about how to spice things up if you don't want to limit yourself just to net running, but if you want to keep net running as a core of your build. Now, to be honest, you can spend remaining points however you want. If you want to be a net runner with gorilla arms, you can do that. You want to use shotguns? That's also a viable option. If you want to use blades or sniper rifles or assault rifles, you can invest the rest of the points into reflexes, but if you want to use throwing knives or handguns, you can invest the remaining points into cool. So from this point, each option is basically viable. But if you want to min-max this build, there are certain playstyles that kind of combo better with this build, for example, than gorilla arms, assault rifles, and so on. And these are smart weapons and monowire. Monowire mostly due to the finisher option, because with this build sometimes you may stumble upon a situation when an enemy is gonna have like 2 HP left. So having that monowire finisher is just pretty cool, especially that it restores 5 RAM. And the same goes to smart weapons. Basically, if you neutralize an enemy, it restores 2 RAM, along with a few other not so major benefits. But honestly, the most important part of those two types of weapons is that they really combo well with a certain quick hack, but I will get into the detail about it once I'll start talking about the game plan. So if you want to use those alongside with Netrunning, this is how I would spend some of the remaining points into the intelligence tree. But to finish off with the perks, as I've said previously, you can spend the remaining attribute points into either cool or reflexes, but if it comes to my personal preference, I would put it into reflexes, mostly because it unlocks dash, which is a super useful ability, not just for zooming around Night City, but it also really comes handy in combat. But that's it for this part. Let's get into the cyberware. So first off, let me shortly explain to you how cyberware works in 2.0 in case you're not familiar. So on the left side you have a bar and a number indicating the maximum amount of cyberware that V's body can handle. And on each piece of cyberware there is a yellow number indicating how much it adds to this capacity. And the capacity, by the way, can be increased by increasing your skill progression in the tech tree, but also it can be increased by certain perks that I mentioned in the previous section of this video. But also let's talk about the bar on the right side. It basically indicates the armor you get from cyberware, because yes, cyberware is the main source of armor right now in the game. And since the bar is blue, the blue number on the cyberware indicates the armor that you get from it. And that's it. So let's get into what cyberware you really want with this build. Let's start with frontal cortex. I'd say this category of cyberware is the most important for this build. So let's start with a piece of cyberware that makes this build so beastly, and that is COX-2 Cyber Somatic Optimizer. It not only allows your quick hacks to deal crit hits because they normally can, but also it gives them 100% of crit chance, which basically makes V able to wipe out every enemy, no matter if it's an elite or a regular enemy, with 1 synapse burnout, which is massive. Now this cyberware normally comes with a cost of -8 RAM, but if you upgrade it to 5++ tier, it only takes away 4, which is okay. The problem with this cyberware though is that you can only unlock it after entering Dogtown. So I'd say if you're done with the DLC prologue, just go and get it. But also don't worry, this is not like something that is just required for this build to be good. It is an absolute beast even without it, but this is just elevating it into yet another level. But before you get into Dogtown, I highly recommend using this cyberware instead. Alright, next cyberware for this category is the X-Disk. It gives you +6 RAM, which is incredible, and also makes quick hacks upload 23% faster. And next thing is obviously memory boost. It isn't as strong as it was in the previous game, but it still gets the work done. It gives you +1 RAM, but makes every elimination restore 1.3 RAM units. And I know it may not seem like much, but it is. As for the hand cyberware, it is totally up to your preference, but if you decided to min-max this build like I explained in this video, the best cyberware for this slot in my opinion is thermal monowire. And it is quite important for it to be thermal, but why I will explain in the game plan. And the quick hack that I use on the monowire thanks to the relic tree is cripple movement. I think this is the best quick hack to use with monowire because it increases the melee damage you deal to the target affected by it, and also restores 2 RAM units per finisher, which combos really well with that 1 perk from your perk tree. In the skeleton slot, I highly recommend epimorphic skeleton and universal booster for extra HP and armor, but as a third slot I recommend RAM recoup for the RAM bonuses. As for the nervous system, honestly all of this stuff is optional, but I'm rocking neofiber here for mitigation and Terrorism injector for movement speed. As for the integumentary system, I use it for armor and defensive abilities. Also optical camo because it's just super good in combat, it is super good in stealth, it is just all around a great piece of cyberware. As for the leg cyberware, I like to use reinforced tendons for the double jump, but it is a personal preference, so if you prefer to use something else in that slot, then feel free to do so. But let's go into a very important category, which is the circulatory system. The best combo from this category that you can get for this build is Biomonitor with Blood Pump. Biomonitor monitor basically automatically uses your healing item once the HP drops to 35%, and blood pump is basically the strongest healing item in the game. And thanks to your very wise perk choices that I explained before, you have 3 healing item slots available. But also thanks to the other perks, the recharge time is amplified very much. So the Biomon and Blood Pump combo is just in general very powerful, but to make it even more powerful, you can get Heal on Kill, which gives you 7% HP back per elimination. So these 3 pieces basically not only help you massively with combat, but they also allow you to stay in overclock mode as long as you need. But that's it for the circulatory system. Let's go to the hand cyberware, and here I use Smart Lane because I decided to use smart weapons with this build. And as for the Kiroshis, I think the best option for Netrunning are the Oracle Kiroshis, mostly due to their bonuses. But if you want to use weapons more than quick hacks with this build, I highly recommend getting the Kiroshis with plus 30% crit chance. But let's get into the nitty gritty, which is the cyber deck. And here I gotta tell you, I did test a few cyber decks, and in my opinion, the Raven MK3 is just the best one for this build. It has incredible bonuses that work just incredibly well with this build, such as 100% spread distance for your quick hacks. Also, the quick hacks that spread do so immediately, so you don't have to wait until they finish uploading. And as if it was not enough, there is also a plus 15% chance for quick hacks to spread in general. And all that just makes it an incredible cyber deck. And yeah, that's it if it comes to cyberware. So let's get into the game plan. Now honestly, the game plan is just super simple. If you have the COX-2 Cyber Somatic Optimizer, basically if you get into a fight, you just pop overclock and spam Synapse Burnout. That is literally it. Synapse Burnout does incredible amounts of damage, especially if you deplete your RAM and start using your HP as RAM. Then the damage is even higher, just like the description says. But doing damage is not all this quick hack can do, because if you eliminate an enemy with Synapse Burnout, it gives you plus 5 seconds duration to your overclock. So if you take out 2 enemies with it, plus 10 seconds. So with this, unless you go idle for 14 seconds, you can basically keep up overclock as long as there are enemies, and of course as long as you have HP. But considering you have a lot of healing items and a massive recharge rate on those, on a very high level build, that really shouldn't be a problem unless you soak up a lot of damage at once. But if you don't have the COX-2 Cyber Somatic Optimizer, you still can spam Synapse Burnout, but I would highly recommend adding System Collapse to your rotation. And that is for 3 reasons. First of all, this quick hack is a guaranteed elimination, and if it spreads, you basically get 2 eliminations with 1 quick hack. Second of all, if you want to be stealthy, you can use this quick hack to take a little bit away from the tracing progress. And the third thing is that if you open a fight with it, considering you have enough RAM to use it without overclocking, your RAM immediately gets depleted, which makes your next Synapse Burnout deal a shitload of damage. So without the COX-2 Cyber Somatic Optimizer, I would highly recommend using stealth with this build, because it just simply allows you to do more damage. And that is cool and all, but what if you don't want to use overclock, or if it's on cooldown? So first of all, let's talk about what if you don't want to use overclock. In this scenario, I recommend a few particular quick hacks. First quick hack is Contagion. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, Contagion damage is kinda mid, but it does combo well with stuff that does burn damage. By the way, throwback to the time when I said that thermal monowire is best. So now it is time for you to know why. So besides the regular effects of Contagion quick hack, for example, the one making it spread to other enemies and so on, there is also an effect saying that if an enemy affected by Contagion set of fire, it explodes. And it does so indeed, dealing quite high damage to himself and everything around him. So if you have a few enemies clamped together, you can just cast Contagion and whip out a thermal monowire, for example, or just cast overheat on one of them, and that basically initiates this extremely powerful combo. But honestly, monowire has quite a low chance of burn damage, so it's not that reliable to trigger this effect. And if you use legendary overheat, it basically depletes your RAM. But if you just want to stick to Netrunning, then I highly recommend the lower rarity of overheat because it will trigger the effect and it's cheaper in RAM. But if you like the hybrid, then here is why I chose smart weapons. Because in the Arasaka Industrial Park there is this one weapon called Shingen prototype something, I don't remember. Anyways, it shoots in salves of 3 and has a very high chance actually of setting enemies on fire. So this gun specifically is great to initiate this combo. So this is basically the combo to do without overclock. And even though the damage is pretty neat from it, it is mostly best for the regular enemies as it's not really gonna do much against elites. So when you fight elites, I highly recommend using overclock. And if you're using the contagion explosion combo, just remember to watch out for civilians near enemies. But as the last game plan for no overclock, especially if you want to remain in stealth, or maybe you're doing a scanners in which there are civilians being threatened and you don't want to use the contagion explosion not to blow them up, then there is also a game plan for this, although it's probably the most boring one to be honest. First version of this game plan is where you have COX-2 Cybersomatic Optimizer equipped, then basically just seek out the non-elite enemies and then cast Sonic Shock as the first quick hack and then cast Overheat as the second quick hack in the queue. Thanks to Embedded Exploit is gonna do 60% more damage, which should take out most of the regular enemies. And this basically allows you to drop like 4 or 5 enemies in stealth before you run out of RAM, which is okay. So if you don't have overclock and you want to play as a pure Netrunner, I guess that's the way to go. And by the way, I also highly recommend using blue overheat and blue sonic shock to reduce the RAM cost. Unfortunately, this only works on the regular enemies. It's not gonna do much damage on elites. But as I've said, if there are elites during a scanner or whatever, I highly recommend just using overclock. But if the level consists mostly of regular enemies and there is only like 1 or 2 elites, then you can just perform a takedown on elites. But if you don't have the COX-2 Cybersomatic Optimizer, then what I recommend adding to the rotation is Cyberware Malfunction and Short Circuit. Both in green rarity honestly should be good to preserve RAM but to do enough damage. And with this you basically cast Sonic Shock, Overheat, Cyberware Malfunction and then Short Circuit. And then just wait for the enemy to drop. Oh, and if you want to use both those playstyles, I highly recommend pick an ice pick for this. And just to sum up these two playstyles, they aren't really that great with this deck if it comes to combo, but just FYI, the last playstyle is really good with leveling and combos really well with Tetratronic Rippler, but I'll talk about that later. So let's basically just sum up how to play. If you're max level or close and have the COX-2 Cybersomatic Optimizer and you know all the other cyberware and perks that I described before, then you can just spam Synapse Burnout like it was Short Circuit back in the days. Although now you can spam it on multiple targets at once. And I recommend using stealth with this, but it also works great in combat. If you don't have the COX-2 Cybersomatic Optimizer, but you have most stuff from the build, then you can also spam Synapse Burnout, but I highly recommend throwing in System Collapse from time to time not to get traced so easily. And this gameplay does much better in stealth, although it works very good in combat as well. Just remember that if you don't one-tap someone with Synapse Burnout in combat, you have the monowire finisher. And those two scenarios are if you have overclock available, but if you don't, or if there is just a small group of enemies, then you can just cast Contagion and either whip out your thermal monowire or the Shingen and just explode them. But if you encounter a small group of enemies and you don't want to use overclock, then just seek out the regular enemies and cast Sonic Shock and then Overheat in one queue, and at the end of the encounter just perform a stealth takedown on the elites if there are any. And as I've said before, this plan requires to have COX-2 Cybersomatic Optimizer equipped, but if you don't have it equipped yet, then instead of Sonic Shock and Overheat, you can just cast blue Sonic Shock, green Short Circuit, green Cyberware Malfunction and blue Overheat. And remember, if you want to get the most out of this stealth approach, then pick Ice Pick in the talents. And honestly, that is mostly it for the game plan. And of course, you know, the game plan I presented here is the late game plan. So you're probably wondering what to do before you upgrade your stuff to legendary. So let's get to the last part of this video, which is the leveling guide. And I'll try to keep it short yet informative because it's just a very long video, man. So let's start with the attributes and what to focus on. I would personally highly recommend getting to 20 intelligence first and then focusing on tech and body. Although I would put a higher priority on tech mostly because it just allows you to carry more cyberware. And mostly the bonuses that this build gets from body only combo well if you have enough cyberware and tech. So That's just a logical thing to do, I guess. So after you start a game, I'd put 3 points into intelligence, 3 points into tech, and 1 into body. While playing the game, I would simultaneously focus on the left intelligence tree and on the middle intelligence tree to increase your quick hack queue so that you can stack sonic shock, short circuit, and overheat on one enemy, but also to unlock overclock to get that glimpse of the true potential of the build. Also, for the leveling, you might go for perks like ice pick and proximate propagation. Now, as for the early leveling, I highly recommend using quick hacks, of course, because that's what this build is about, but also focusing on other weapons to make the skill progressions go faster, because skill progressions are super important. They give you perk points and additional benefits. So yeah, and also a handy tip if you want to get solo XP and tech XP pretty fast, then remember, if you're doing a gig, every camera you can disable manually and that gives you tech XP, but also you can search for shafts and doors that you can use your body to open. That gives you solo XP. Next leveling tip is once you're finished with prologue, I highly recommend getting all the perk shards available, which is an option now because thanks to level scaling, enemies are going to be the same level as you. Because in the vanilla version, some enemies in those locations were so high level after prologue, it wasn't really an option to pick up those perk shards. I have a video on those locations in the description if you're interested. Also, as for the leveling process, so until like level 30 something, I recommend Netrunning Crippler instead of Raven, because before you get strong enough to use overclock to its full potential, you can basically use the stealth game plan with no overclock and no COX-2 cyber somatic optimizer. So sonic shock, short circuit, cyberware malfunction, and overheat. This deck has much better bonuses if it comes to this combo, so for the leveling process it should be a nice pick. Next tip is to remember about Ram Jolt. It is a super good consumable, especially in the early levels. And well, since the DLC is still kind of a fresh subject, you're probably wondering when it is the best time to go to Dogtown. So in my personal opinion, to get the most content out of it, it's best to go there once you're finished with most major characters' quest lines. So probably somewhere around level 30 or 40, depending of course on how many side activities have you finished. And this kind of level is honestly super good to switch to Raven Cyber deck and start using this build to its full potential. And Dogtown honestly is a tough place, so you're gonna need it. Whew, okay, so I guess that would be it for this video, guys. It took me a lot of time to put together and also to figure all this stuff out, so I greatly appreciate all the support from you guys. Also, please let me know in the comments if I missed anything important, and I will put all the additional information that I haven't mentioned in this video in the description. So if you got a question about something specific from this video, there's a high chance the answer is gonna be there in the description. Anyways, the next build guide that I'm planning is about the blades, and this build is just extremely brutal but also super powerful, and you guys keep asking me about it under my streams and videos. So if you guys are interested in it, remember to drop a sub and stay tuned. But that is all for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you later. See ya.